Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Good Boxing Podcast with your host, Josh Sias. Today, I wanted to touch on a major interview I saw on Behind the Gloves with Tyson Fury, where he kind of divulges a little bit about what's going on with Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua. Another big tidbit I wanted to talk on is Tyson Fury also gives his prediction for the Canelo versus Billy Joe Saunders fight coming up in May. Now, everyone wants to see the Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua fight, and we keep hearing that same joke over and over. The deal's almost finalized. Now it's super duper finalized. It's going to happen. We're going to send the contract. Top Rank and Eddie Hearn have spoken. Eddie Hearn has come out on plenty of occasions and said, oh, the deal is almost done. However, in this interview, I did get some reassurance. Tyson Fury starts off by just shooting the shit with Michelle. And I got to say, Michelle, if you're not following her behind the gloves, she really, really, really does get some good interviews. Um, I saw the interview with Billy Joe Saunders and also Tyson Fury. You should definitely check it out. It's really, really high quality. But one of the things that I did like about Tyson Fury's interview was he was pressed about the major fight. And Tyson Fury basically is saying this: he wants to fight. He's anxious to fight. He hasn't been in the ring since the Deontay Wilder smashing, where he beat the brakes off of Deontay Wilder. Say what you want to say, but Tyson Fury did demolish Deontay Wilder and knock him out in the fashion that he mentioned. It wasn't in the second round like he mentioned, but he did knock him out and made a statement. Um, I actually, let me put these back on. One thing I did like about the interview as well was he mentioned, how does he feel about Deontay Wilder? Tyson Fury, believe it or not, hasn't been that open and that scathing, or in my opinion, scathing enough on Deontay Wilder after all of the accusations, Glovegate, the fact that he besmirched the pristine name of Mark Breland, the fact that he blamed the Nevada State Athletic Commission for cheating. Everyone worked in cahoots for a conspiracy theory to plot against Deontay Wilder. The Bronze Bomber couldn't accept the fact that he lost, and that's something that he really did mention in this interview. He was a little hurt, he was a little upset, and he thinks Deontay Wilder, excuse my French, is a piece of shit, and literally word for word called him a piece of shit. And I don't really like the name calling, and I still do respect Deontay Wilder as a fighter. Prior to the Tyson Fury fight, I was a very, very big Deontay Wilder fan, and I actually fancied Deontay Wilder to beat Anthony Joshua if they were to square off during that whole beef. It has nothing to do with me being based out of America and Anthony Joshua being based out of the UK. I just truthfully feel like Anthony Joshua makes a lot of mistakes defensively, and if you do make a mistake, as Tyson Fury did find out as well, you will pay the ultimate consequence, like Luis Ortiz and many other fighters, and most of the fighters that actually faced Deontay Wilder. They all got knocked out for the exception of Tyson Fury and the first time with Bermain Stervern. So say what you want to say, but Deontay Wilder was the boogeyman of the division, and surprisingly, Tyson Fury acknowledges that. You can sit here and say that maybe Tyson Fury is trying to make his win over Deontay Wilder look better by saying that Deontay Wilder is still a very good fighter, and he actually fancies Deontay Wilder to beat every other heavyweight in the division. He feels that no other heavyweight in the division other than himself can handle the Bronze Bomber in the fashion that he did. He feels that Deontay Wilder would actually smoke Anthony Joshua, and that's what he said. He did say that verbatim. He feels like he could beat Dillian White. He feels like he could beat Andy Ruiz. Every other heavyweight in the division, Tyson Fury is fancying Deontay Wilder to beat. And look, Deontay Wilder said some very scathing things, like I said, about Tyson Fury. But if you do watch the fight, even in the second fight, Tyson Fury had to eat a hard ass right hand in that first round. I don't know if anyone remembers, but the reason why he had that really, really bad bruise on his face, and yes, he looked it off. Yes, he didn't take the full brunt of it, but Deontay Wilder threw a haymaker that almost connected. And if Tyson Fury didn't roll it off or kind of go with it, he could have been potentially rocked. He even mentioned it in the press conference, etc. I do agree with Tyson Fury in this case. I do think that Deontay Wilder could beat Anthony Joshua if he does have his mind right. If his mind is perfectly back to normal, which it won't be because when you lose your mystique, your O, things change. You can't deny that. Maybe he needs a couple of tune up fights to kind of get his confidence back, especially when you're a puncher. It's very, very hard to admit that someone out there can take the punch that has made every man quit. So I do think Deontay Wilder would need a couple of tune-up fights just to get his confidence back, but I do fancy him to beat Dillian White. I do fancy him to beat Andy Ruiz because of that power. Believe it or not, you can be losing the entire fight. And yes, you did get knocked out by Tyson Fury, but Tyson Fury is a much bigger dude. Deontay Wilder was not used to fighting someone that physically was longer and stronger than him. And you saw it. It was the first time the bully got stood up to, and he got knocked out. But regardless of that, Tyson Fury did mention that the fight and the deal seems to be going well, and he feels that Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury is being done at the right time. Michelle had mentioned that, oh, is this like Lewis and Tyson? And Tyson Fury rightfully so said, hey, this isn't like Lewis and Tyson. Tyson and Lewis fought at the end of their career. They were kind of in the heyday where everyone was trying to go off, similar to Mayweather and Pacquiao, where they fought later in the twilight of their career. So I do like the fact that this fight is happening when it's happening, and so does Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury feels that both him and Anthony Joshua are by far the best in the division, and this fight will solidify who's the best. When asked if he feels Anthony Joshua has a better resume than him, if he were to beat Tyson Fury in this fight, yes, we know there's a rematch. Would Anthony Joshua be the best of the era? And Anthony Joshua was not named the best of the era by Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury feels that even if he does lose to Anthony Joshua, his resume over his era is better than Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua does have a win over Klitschko, but it was after the fact, after Tyson Fury had beat him, after he was no longer the same Vladimir Klitschko that was dominating with his jab and grab style. Yes, that fight with Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko was fantastic. I do agree. I think it was a very, very good fight. But if that fight took place a little further and earlier in Klitschko's career, I think Klitschko could have possibly pulled it out because he did look chinny at the end, and it just looked like he wasn't the same mentally. And I agree. When you take your first L, it's not the same. You're not going to be the same. So Anthony Joshua beat Vladimir Klitschko. If he does beat Tyson Fury, though, and he beats them both of rematch in the first fight and the second fight, then maybe you can make an argument. But I do agree with Tyson Fury when he does say that Anthony Joshua would have to go out and also beat the likes of Deontay Wilder and the Dillian Whites of the world, etc., just to kind of keep building that legacy. Because beating Tyson Fury twice, even though I think that's a fantastic accomplishment, I think you do need to test yourself against the top heavyweights. When you think about the top heavyweights in the division, it's Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, then Deontay Wilder, Andy Ruiz, Dillian White, and then the list is subjective from there. So say what you want to say, but I do kind of agree with him that I think if Tyson Fury beats Anthony Joshua, he solidifies himself as the best heavyweight of this era, period. And I do think that if Anthony Joshua does beat Tyson Fury, he still has some unfinished business to catch up to Tyson Fury. I don't see Tyson Fury losing two fights to Anthony Joshua. And Anthony Joshua could arguably make a case that if he does beat Tyson Fury, the, in my opinion, number one heavyweight in the division, even though Anthony Joshua does have more belts, but it's still an accomplishment. I do like the fact that Tyson Fury is saying the right things. He's saying that he wants the fight to be made. He's saying that he is dying to fight Anthony Joshua. He's saying that he's been in shape in the gym, and he says that he's ready to go. He's ready to go as soon as possible. And this kind of feeds into my theory that nothing's going to be announced until that hearing in the case with Wilder's over. Once there's a legal agreement, a legal settlement, and then all of the details of the fight can be released. Because right now you can speculatively say that they have some backroom deals, but if Deontay Wilder ends up winning a case and there is a fight made, then he can make a case to say that he needs to be compensated effectively, adequately rather, for the fight that shouldn't have been made, given the fact that he has a rematch clause. The rematch clauses are normally ironclad. And if Deontay Wilder doesn't want to get bought out or paid a lump sum of money, he's going to be a stickler in the side of the fight that we want to see. But moving on, you already know the fight's almost here. The fight's almost close. The fight is this. The fight is that. I'm just glad that Tyson Fury isn't saying his normal, oh, I'm tired of it. If I don't get this contract by Tuesday, I'm done with the fight. I'm moving on. But I think the fight's going to take place a little later in the year, or even if not, maybe July, September, who knows. As long as the fight's kind of being made, I want to see it. But at the same time, I also am aware that contracts are contracts for a reason. The same way that if Tyson Fury were to lose to Anthony Joshua, he would get a rematch. Deontay Wilder and losing to Tyson Fury, even though we don't want to see it, you got to give the guy his just due. Let him go through the legal system. Let them figure that out and let that happen the way it has to. I know it's a thorn in the side of the fight, but the legal system's there. And yes, it does. It is a double-edged sword, but we got to let the due process happen, especially when it does benefit other fighters in other ways. So it just can't work for you when you want it to, and vice versa. But the thing that I found the most interesting about this interview was Tyson Fury was talking about his lineage and how he's a gypsy and he was born to fight, and he feels like he could fight on any given day. He could drink, smoke, doesn't matter. You could train as hard as you want, but he fancies Billy Joe Saunders to actually beat Canelo. He says it's going to be a very, very easy fight, and a lot of people are going to be surprised that Billy Joe might outbox Canelo Alvarez. We're talking about the pound for pound number one. In my opinion, you can arguably say Terrence Crawford is arguably number one. I've gone back and forth with this, but right now, Canelo Alvarez is number one. So Tyson Fury fancies Billy Joe Saunders to win in that fight. He feels like he's going to outbox Canelo. Canelo does hit hard, and he's not taken away from Canelo, but his rationale is Canelo has one loss. He lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr. He feels like he lost potentially to Arislandi Lara, and he feels like there are other fighters that give him trouble. Austin Trout gave him trouble from the southpaw position. He also feels like he's avoided certain fighters that are lefty and southpaw due to the tricky style. So he fancies Billy Joe Saunders to step it up because he's seen Billy Joe at another level that other people haven't. He watches Billy Joe in the gym and he feels like Billy Joe Saunders is one of those fighters that you put him in the pressure cooker, he becomes the most perfect version of himself. So that night in May in Dallas, Texas, where the whole world's going to be watching Cinco de Mayo weekend. You already know the celebration is going to be wild. You know the fans are going to be out in droves to support Canelo Alvarez, their man out of Guadalajara, Mexico. He's fancying Billy Joe to shock the world and actually come back home with most of the belts. And if that happens, wow. I personally think Canelo's going to win. I'm a huge Billy Joe Saunders fan, but I also am aware that at 168, he's not the same fighter, in my opinion. But again, maybe Billy Joe shows up hungry and just eager to win the fight. I mean, they're both a kind of the same size. So that maybe Billy Joe comes in light and just tries to feel as natural as he can and just outboxes Canelo Alvarez with that slick southpaw movement. Who knows? Maybe Tyson Fury knows something I don't, because a lot of people didn't think Tyson Fury would go out there and knock Deontay Wilder out. So maybe he's a prognosticator and has seen something we don't. We don't know the game plan. We don't know what he's trying to accomplish. But Billy Joe Saunders, in his opinion, is a superior boxer to Canelo Alvarez. So I mean, Tyson Fury is an former undisputed champion. He's the best heavyweight in the world, and the man can box his fucking ass off. Say what you want about Tyson Fury, but he can box. So maybe Billy Joe Saunders has the secret sauce that he needs in order to beat Canelo Alvarez. It would be a fantastic upset, honestly. I don't personally think he's going to do it. But again, I'm just a man with a podcast trying to prognosticate an event. And I think Canelo Alvarez right now is the baddest boxer on the planet, pound for pound. So until proven otherwise, you can be southpaw, you can be whatever you want, but Canelo Alvarez right now is on another planet, and I continue to see him being in outer space until someone brings him back down to reality. Maybe Billy Joe Saunders is that guy. Is he going to struggle in moments? Yes, because that's what happens when you fight the best. When the best fight the best, you struggle. It's not going to be these blowouts. It's not going to be the fight that we saw his mandatory where he blew him out, right? So I don't know about Billy Joe Saunders beating Canelo Alvarez, but I do love Tyson Fury talking about the fight and supporting his man. So that's the podcast for today. Support the podcast on Instagram at Good Boxing Podcast. Thank you so much for all of your support. If you like the video, like, subscribe. Thank you so much. Hit that notification bell. The content is going to keep on flowing in. I love doing this daily podcast every day. So thank you so much and have a good day.